Arav Malhotra was a celebrated Indian CEO, a symbol of success and discipline, until the day his deadly affair with a much younger woman, Ria D'Souza, exposed the dark secrets behind his perfect life, leaving his wife Mira fighting to uncover the horrifying truth that nearly cost someone their life. Arav Malhotra was the name that echoed through boardrooms and business conferences across India. At 45, he had achieved what many only dreamt of. CEO of one of Bangalore's fastest-growing tech firms, he was often featured in business magazines and interviewed on leadership panels. With a tall frame, peppered hair, and a tailored wardrobe that screamed success, Arav was the embodiment of corporate excellence. His carefully curated image was that of a disciplined leader, loving husband, and forward-thinking innovator. He spoke eloquently about work-life balance, employee mental health, and ethical growth. But what the cameras never caught, and what no article ever mentioned, was the hidden life he had crafted behind this shiny exterior. His home life mirrored his public one. Married to Mira for over 18 years, Arav appeared to have the ideal domestic setup. Mira had once been a bold and articulate journalist, known for her hard-hitting articles on corruption and women's rights. But after the birth of their son, she chose to step back from her career to support Arav's ambitions and manage their growing household. Over the years, Mira settled into the role of a polished homemaker, the graceful woman at every business event by her husband's side, with her sari always perfectly draped and her words carefully measured. They had a son studying abroad, a luxurious villa in one of Bangalore's elite gated communities, and a network of influential friends and relatives. To outsiders, theirs was a marriage made of trust and mutual respect. Arav's weekdays were structured to the minute. His mornings began with yoga on the terrace, followed by green tea and business calls before sunrise. He would then head to his office in a sleek black car with tinted windows, driven by his trusted chauffeur. Inside the company walls, he was known for his perfectionism, his temper, and his absolute control over every decision. Employees both admired and feared him. Promotions, bonuses, and even terminations were always his final call. Though his leadership was tough, his results were undeniable. Under his guidance, the company's valuation tripled in 5 years. But in the shadows of all this success, things had begun to shift. It started with harmless distractions, extended meetings, frequent client dinners, and out-of-town conferences. Mira had noticed the changes. Arav's gaze seemed distant. He had started working on weekends, often returning home late at night. He grew secretive with his phone and conversations turned shallow. But Mira had lived through ups and downs. She knew marriages had phases. She gave him space, convincing herself that it was just a stressful period, that perhaps the company was facing something he wasn't ready to share. The first real clue came from an unintentional slip. One Sunday afternoon, as Arav was taking a shower, his phone vibrated multiple times. Mira glanced at it, as she always did, out of habit, not suspicion. A notification from a rideshare app showed a drop-off location at a luxury hotel. The same hotel, in fact, where Arav had once celebrated their anniversary. But he hadn't told her he was going there. The timestamp was from just the day before, during a supposed board meeting. She didn't mention it. Instead, she quietly noted the detail and tucked it away. Soon, the inconsistencies piled up. Arav began taking calls in hushed tones. He changed his phone's lock screen password. He started keeping a second phone. He said it was for international clients. Mira noticed new shirts in the laundry that weren't gifts from her. There were traces of perfume she didn't wear, and once she found a hairpin in the back seat of the car. Still, she said nothing. The more suspicious she became, the more controlled her behavior became. She cooked his favorite meals, asked about work, and kept a smile fixed on her face. Mira had been a journalist. She knew the power of patience, of letting people reveal themselves when they believed no one was watching. Arav, meanwhile, believed he had everything under control. In his mind, the lines between loyalty and indulgence had blurred. He told himself he still loved Mira, that this new distraction was just a phase, but deep down, he was being pulled into a dangerous spiral. It wasn't just about physical temptation anymore. It had become emotional, obsessive. He had begun confiding in someone else, sharing secrets he once only told Mira. He felt seen again, youthful, admired. The thrill was intoxicating. He started redirecting his attention, time, and eventually, money. Company funds were subtly rerouted, small amounts at first, then larger. He signed off on travel reimbursements that never happened and hired consultants with no real roles. When one of his accountants raised questions, Arav reprimanded him for insubordination and swiftly replaced him. No one challenged the CEO. No one asked questions if they wanted to keep their jobs. This allowed him to continue his deception unchecked. While the company's quarterly growth remained impressive, Arav's inner world was becoming chaotic. He grew paranoid, started screening staff for loyalty, and even installed surveillance in the office under the guise of security upgrades. At home, he barely noticed Mira anymore. Her silence gave him comfort, made him believe she was unaware or simply too passive to care. He couldn't have been more wrong. In truth, Mira was gathering her own quiet storm. Every inconsistency, every new habit, every clue was being catalogued in her mind. She knew that something was coming. She didn't know what exactly, but she sensed it would not be harmless. She stopped trusting the mask Arav wore and began preparing for the day it would fall off. That day came sooner than she expected, and when it arrived, it would shake not just her world, but the entire image that Arav had built brick by brick over the years. It would be the beginning of a scandal so dark and deep that no amount of wealth or reputation could cover it. Ria D'Souza arrived at Arav Malhotra's company like a gust of fresh air. Young, confident, and unapologetically ambitious, she was everything the corporate world admired in the new generation. At just 24, she had secured a marketing internship through a college referral. Her resume was impressive, but it was her charm and instinct for attention that truly stood out. Within days of joining, she had caught the eye of not only her team, but of Arav himself. Their first interaction was brief, a presentation where Ria confidently critiqued the company's digital strategy, offering sharp, well-researched suggestions. Arav had been in the back of the room casually observing, but her boldness piqued his interest. Most interns hesitated to challenge norms, especially in front of senior management. But not Ria. She was different. And Arav, though twice her age, found that difference magnetic. Initially, there was nothing inappropriate. Arav invited her to a follow-up meeting, claiming he wanted to hear more of her ideas. She was flattered. For a young woman trying to make a mark, being noticed by the CEO felt like an achievement. The meetings became frequent. Arav would compliment her work, offer advice on career growth, and occasionally slip in personal questions. Ria responded with enthusiasm. She admired powerful men. She loved luxury. And soon, admiration turned into flirtation. The relationship moved swiftly from professional to personal. It started with harmless messages late at night, memes, jokes, compliments. Arav started texting her during business trips. She replied eagerly, enjoying the attention. Soon he began calling her after office hours. Long conversations where he spoke about his life, his dreams, and eventually his dissatisfaction at home. Ria listened, offered sympathy, and subtly hinted that he deserved more. Within weeks, they had crossed the line. Secret meetings at boutique hotels followed. Arav was cautious at first, using aliases, paying in cash, and ensuring there was no digital trail. But the deeper he fell, the more careless he became. He bought Ria expensive gifts, a designer bag for her birthday, a gold bracelet after a conference, and eventually, an apartment tucked away in a posh neighborhood. It was registered in someone else's name, but it was clear who funded it. Inside the company, whispers began. Colleagues noticed Ria's sudden rise. She was moved from intern to junior executive in record time. She traveled to events other employees at her level didn't get access to. While most stayed silent, a few middle managers raised quiet concerns. But Arav's influence was absolute. He dismissed their concerns, labeling them as jealous or uncooperative. The HR head who flagged the promotion policy was reassigned. No one dared to question him again. Ria, now financially secure and emotionally entangled, grew bolder. She began demanding more of Arav's time. She wanted longer weekends together, trips abroad, and even asked him once, half-jokingly, what his life would look like without Mira. Arav laughed it off, but the idea lingered. At work, his focus shifted. He missed deadlines, postponed meetings, and grew irritable with his board. Investors noticed, but he managed to keep them pacified. He was still delivering results, barely. At home, Mira continued to play the role of the silent observer. She noticed a new cologne Arav started using. She found receipts for purchases he never brought home. Once, she stumbled upon a lipstick stain on his shirt collar, a shade she never owned. Still, she didn't confront him. She began gathering more evidence, careful not to alert him. She even quietly installed a GPS tracker in his car. Week after week, the tracker sent signals from unfamiliar places, mostly hotels and the apartment complex Ria now lived in. Ria didn't know she was being watched. She believed she was winning. Her confidence grew. She started telling close friends about her relationship, describing Arav as in love and promising that soon he'd leave his wife. She wasn't wrong. Arav had begun entertaining the thought. He imagined a new life, one filled with passion, freedom, and youth. Mira, in his mind, had become a shadow of the past, someone he owed gratitude to, not love. But things began to unravel when Ria pushed too hard. She began hinting at public appearances. She wanted him to attend a friend's wedding with her. When he refused, she accused him of hiding her. In a moment of rage, she threatened to leak photos. Arav panicked. He knew the consequences. His marriage, reputation, and company would collapse. He tried calming her, offering more money, more promises. But Ria had reached her limit. She didn't want to be a secret anymore. One evening, she called Arav while he was at home. He stepped into the garden to take the call, unaware that Mira was nearby. She couldn't hear everything, but she caught enough. Words like exposed, sick of hiding, and you promised were spoken. Her suspicions were confirmed. That night, she didn't sleep. The betrayal had gone from subtle to undeniable. Meanwhile, Arav was spiraling. His perfect control had begun slipping. He avoided calls from board members, neglected Mira entirely, and threw himself deeper into the affair as if it were an escape. But even Ria started pulling away. She had stopped responding immediately, cancelled their meetings last minute, and hinted at talking to someone else. Arav couldn't stand the thought. The power he held over her seemed to vanish, and it terrified him. In desperation, he began crafting a plan. He knew he couldn't let Ria ruin him. He had worked too hard for too long, and now he feared not just exposure, but complete destruction. The relationship had become a ticking time bomb, one that he needed to defuse before it exploded. Ria, unaware of the storm building, believed she still had the upper hand. She didn't realize that beneath Arav's cold charm was a man capable of terrible things when pushed into a corner. She had underestimated how far he would go to protect his image, his money, and the life he had carefully constructed. And as Mira watched everything quietly fall apart, she knew the real danger wasn't a T in the affair, but in how far a man like Arav might go to make it disappear. Mira Malhotra sat alone in the corner of her dimly lit study, a stack of printed emails in one hand and a pen in the other. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound in the room. Over the past few weeks, her routine had changed. Instead of planning dinners or attending charity events, she had immersed herself in tracking the secret life of her husband. What had started as a gut feeling had now transformed into undeniable evidence of betrayal. The shift in Mira was not just emotional, it was strategic. She had stopped reacting and started documenting. Every transaction, every strange hotel receipt, every night he came home late with vague excuses was carefully recorded. Her background in investigative journalism gave her a keen eye for inconsistencies. She no longer wondered if something was going on. She knew. Now she wanted the whole truth, and she was methodically pulling the curtain back. Her investigation took a more serious turn the day she received a call from one of Arav's former accountants. It was a brief, mistaken call, but enough to raise a red flag. He had asked about a payment made to a freelancer for an unapproved marketing project. Mira's instincts kicked in. The payment had been labeled as consulting fees, but the name attached to the bank transfer sounded familiar. Ria D'Souza. Mira acted quickly. She hired a private investigator, someone she had trusted in the past for sensitive family matters. Within 2 weeks, the investigator returned with a complete file on Ria. There were photographs of her with Arav at luxury restaurants, footage of the two entering and exiting a hotel on multiple occasions, and even a record of lease documents for an apartment paid for in cash by a corporate account linked to Arav's company. Mira took all the information in silently, her expression unreadable. She thanked the investigator and paid in full, ensuring discretion. But instead of confronting Arav, Mira remained calm. She didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't even hint that she knew. Instead, she changed tactics. She started observing Arav with a sharper lens. He came home later than usual now, always tired, often distracted. He barely made eye contact, and even the small talk had evaporated. At dinner, he played with his food, glancing at his phone repeatedly. Mira noted it all. She was no longer a participant in the marriage. She had become its observer. One night, while Arav was asleep, Mira took his secondary phone from his briefcase. She had seen him use it secretly before, always turning away to type or answer. She knew the password. It was his mother's birthday. Within seconds, she had access to months of text conversations, photos, voice notes, and call logs. The depth of Arav's affair was worse than she imagined. The messages were intimate, full of promises and longing. Ria had even sent ultrasound pictures. Mira froze. She stared at the screen, the tiny black and white image confirming what she feared. Ria was pregnant. The revelation shook Mira, but she didn't allow herself to break down. Instead, she took screenshots of everything and uploaded them to a secure cloud account. She printed out the most critical evidence and stored it in a locked drawer. She also began making secret recordings in the house. A small voice-activated recorder was placed under the desk in Arav's study. She knew he often made private calls from there. If he slipped up, she'd have it on tape. Over the next few days, Arav became increasingly anxious. He snapped at employees on the phone, locked himself in his room for hours, and canceled meetings. At night, he paced the halls, sometimes murmuring to himself. Mira watched quietly. She could sense something had shifted. Arav was no longer just cheating. He was panicking. He was unraveling. One evening, she overheard a conversation through the slightly ajar door of his study. Arav was on the phone, whispering harshly. Phrases like, "She can't keep it. This could destroy everything, and I'll take care of it," reached Mira's ears. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. It became clear that Arav was no longer just trying to hide the affair. He was planning to erase it altogether. Ria had grown impatient. She was threatening to go public, demanding a decision. Arav, cornered and desperate, had started making arrangements. He reached out to contacts who owed him favors. He wanted to move Ria out of the city under the pretext of safety, and had even spoken to a doctor about alternative options for the pregnancy. But Ria wasn't agreeing. She was determined to keep the child and refused to be hidden any longer. This pushed Arav to his breaking point. He began speaking in riddles, suggesting more permanent solutions. His tone wasn't just fearful. It was dangerous. Mira knew she needed to act fast. She gathered all her evidence into one comprehensive folder. Text transcripts, bank records, GPS data, voice recordings, and printed emails. She placed it in a safety deposit box under her name and left copies with her lawyer, with instructions to deliver them to the police if anything happened to her or if she failed to make a weekly check-in call. Mira had once loved Arav deeply, but now she saw him for what he was, a man driven by control and ego, someone who would do anything to protect his image. She no longer felt betrayal. She felt resolve. The next week, Arav told her he had to go on a business trip. He was vague about the location. Mira didn't ask questions. She just nodded, smiling politely. After he left, she followed the GPS signal on his car. It led not to a conference center, but to a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of the city, a property Arav had purchased years ago for private getaways. Mira waited until midnight, then called her investigator and told him to stay on alert. Something terrible was coming. Inside that farmhouse, Arav was preparing for the final act of his deception. But what he didn't know was that Mira, the woman he had ignored and underestimated, had already set the trap. He was walking straight into it, and there would be no escape. Arav stood in the dimly lit kitchen of the remote farmhouse, his mind spiraling as the rain tapped gently against the window panes. The storm outside had crept in slowly, mirroring the one brewing within him. He stared at the glass of whiskey in his hand, untouched, his thoughts louder than the thunder rolling in the distance. His plan, once so calculated and rational in his mind, now felt like a tangled web tightening around him. Ria was no longer just a secret. She had become a threat, unpredictable and emotional. And now, with a pregnancy complicating everything, Arav felt like he was drowning. Ria had refused every offer he made: money, travel, even a promise of marriage if she agreed to stay quiet. None of it worked. She wanted her place in the world he had built. She wanted legitimacy, and Arav, bound by fear of public humiliation and financial ruin, had convinced himself that the only way forward was to remove the problem at its root. That was why he brought her here, under the pretense of a reconciliation, a getaway to discuss their future. He had chosen this secluded location deliberately. No neighbors, no cameras, no questions. Ria arrived at the farmhouse just before dusk. She wore a soft blue kurta, and her face lit up when she saw him. Despite all the warnings from friends, despite the delays and broken promises, a part of her still believed in the story he had sold her. She believed that he loved her, that they would build a life together. Her trust, so complete and blind, made Arav uneasy. It wasn't a pity. He had moved past that, but a discomfort born from the realization that the lines between manipulation and reality had started to blur. He cooked dinner, trying to appear calm. They ate in silence, the mood heavy. Ria noticed his nervous energy, the way he avoided eye contact, how he kept checking his phone even though there was no signal here. She asked a few questions, testing his sincerity, but his vague responses left her uneasy. When she excused herself to go to the bathroom, she took her purse with her. Inside was a recording device, activated with one tap. She had started carrying it ever since he began acting strangely. Something about this trip didn't feel right, and though she wanted to trust him, she also wanted insurance. While she was gone, Arav opened a drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a small bottle. Inside was a clear, odorless liquid, something he had acquired through someone he met years ago, back when the company was in legal trouble. It was a tranquilizer, potent enough to put someone to sleep for hours, undetectable in most routine tests. His plan was simple. Ria would pass out, he would make it look like an accidental overdose, and her silence would be permanent. It was dark, desperate, and dangerous. But Arav believed it was the only way to protect everything he had built. He poured a few drops into her drink, stirred gently, and took a deep breath. When she returned, he handed her the glass and raised his own in a forced toast. Ria smiled faintly, but didn't drink. Instead, she began talking about the baby, about how she wanted to keep it, about how it was the one thing that gave her purpose. She mentioned her parents, her childhood, and how she had grown up believing love could fix everything. Arav's hands trembled. For a moment, something inside him cracked. He looked at her, not as a problem, but as a person, vulnerable, hopeful. And then, just as quickly, the feeling was gone, replaced by the cold logic that had governed his every decision. Before she could take a sip, a loud knock echoed through the farmhouse. Arav froze. No one should have been there. He rushed to the door, and to his shock, standing under the porch light soaked in rain, was Mira. Her expression was unreadable, calm, controlled. Behind her stood a plain-clothed officer and the private investigator Mira had hired. Arav's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but no words came. Mira stepped inside without asking. She looked past him, saw Ria on the couch, confused and pale, holding a glass but not having touched it. The officer followed, his gaze scanning the room. The investigator handed Mira a small voice recorder, one that had been transmitting Arav's phone conversations for the past week. The officer moved toward Arav, asked him to step aside, and read him his rights under suspicion of attempted murder, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Arav tried to protest, his voice breaking into a stammer. But Mira stepped forward and handed over a folder containing all the evidence she had been collecting. Inside were transaction records, recorded calls, screenshots of threats, GPS logs, and photos of Arav and Ria. The final piece was a chemical analysis report of the tranquilizer, matched with the residue found in the bottle retrieved from the farmhouse kitchen. Ria stared in shock, struggling to process the scene unfolding around her. Mira walked over, knelt beside her, and gently took the glass from her hands. Her tone was steady but firm. She told Ria that she knew everything, that she didn't hate her, but she wished she had seen Arav for what he was. Ria nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes, realizing how close she had come to death. Arav was handcuffed and led out into the rain. His empire, his reputation, and the carefully constructed lies all crumbled in a matter of minutes. He looked back one last time at Mira, who stood silent, her face unflinching. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, exhausted sadness. The news broke the next morning. Headlines screamed of the scandal. Top CEO arrested in attempted murder plot. Social media exploded. Board members resigned. Stock prices plummeted. Every magazine that once celebrated Arav's leadership now tore him apart. Former employees came forward with stories of abuse, fraud, and cover-ups. Mira stayed out of the spotlight. She gave one statement to the press, requesting privacy for herself and her son. Ria, after weeks of counseling and recovery, filed a lawsuit against Arav and the company. Her story inspired countless women to speak out about exploitation and coercion in corporate India. The farmhouse remained untouched, a symbol of what almost happened, a place where ambition nearly turned into tragedy. Arav was denied bail and awaited trial, facing years of prison time. His downfall was complete, not through scandalous headlines or business losses, but through the quiet determination of a woman he once believed was invisible. The courtroom was silent, filled with the kind of tension that made even the air feel heavy. Arav Malhotra sat in the defendant's chair, his once pristine image now tainted beyond repair. Gone were the tailored suits, the confident stride, the polished speeches. Instead, he wore a plain, wrinkled shirt and a look of defeat. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, were now sunken and restless. The trial had attracted nationwide attention. Every day, reporters lined up outside the courthouse, live streaming updates to an audience eager to see justice unfold. Mira sat a few rows behind the prosecution, dignified and composed. She hadn't missed a single day of the trial. Her presence was a statement, not of vengeance, but of strength. She remained silent throughout the proceedings, never making eye contact with Arav, never flinching as his secrets were laid bare for the world to see. The evidence was overwhelming. Voice recordings, emails, financial records, and the bottle of tranquilizer found in the farmhouse, all meticulously tied back to him. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Arav had used power and deceit to control, manipulate, and nearly kill. Ria D'Souza took the stand midway through the trial. Her testimony was quiet, but impactful. She spoke of promises made, lies told, and the fear she felt that night at the farmhouse. Her voice trembled when she recalled how close she had come to dying. But when she looked at Mira across the courtroom, something in her steadied. She continued without breaking down, her words becoming more certain, her story more powerful. The courtroom listened in stunned silence. The defense tried to portray Araf as a victim of stress, a man pushed to the edge by corporate pressures and emotional entanglements. But the jury didn't buy it. The calculated nature of his actions left little room for sympathy. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold, methodical plan, undone only by the vigilance of a wife he thought was too naive to notice. As the trial neared its end, public opinion had fully turned. News channels revisited old interviews, dissected his past deals, and unearthed a history of misconduct within his company. Former employees exposed toxic work environments, backdoor dealings, and quiet payouts to avoid scandal. Investors pulled out, partnerships dissolved. Arav's empire, once a model of Indian corporate success, had become a cautionary tale. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. The judge read the charges one by one: attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and corporate fraud. The jury delivered its decision without hesitation, guilty on all counts. Arav showed no visible reaction, only a slight lowering of his head. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison, with no chance of parole for the first 15. The gavel came down, and with it, the final chapter of a man who had lost everything in pursuit of control. Mira walked out of the courtroom into a sea of cameras and microphones. For a moment, the reporters surged forward, but she raised her hand and they quieted. Her voice was calm, unwavering. She thanked the court for upholding justice, expressed empathy for Ria, and reminded everyone that silence and dignity are not signs of weakness. Then she walked away, not waiting for applause or acknowledgement. Ria, too, chose to avoid the spotlight. She returned to her hometown and began working with a non-profit that supported women who faced workplace harassment. Her child, born a few months after the trial, became her source of strength. She never spoke publicly about Arav again, choosing instead to focus on healing and rebuilding. Arav's story continued behind bars, though no longer in the headlines. He spent his days isolated, his influence stripped, his name no longer a symbol of success but of disgrace. No business school spoke of his rise. Instead, they analyzed his fall, a case study in ego, power, and unchecked ambition. Meanwhile, Mira transformed the tragedy into something greater. She founded an organization dedicated to helping spouses of high-profile abusers gather evidence safely and legally. She used her experience to craft tools and resources for those trapped in manipulative relationships. Her network quietly grew, helping women across the country navigate the complex web of silence and shame that so often kept them from speaking out. She moved to a quieter neighborhood with her son, enrolled him in a new school, and began writing a memoir, not about the scandal, but about survival. She called it The Quiet Wife. It became a bestseller, not for its drama, but for its raw honesty and quiet strength. Readers connected with her story, not as the wife of a disgraced CEO, but as a woman who chose truth over comfort, courage over convenience. In the end, Arav's deadly affair became more than a crime story. It became a mirror for a society that often overlooked the cracks beneath polished surfaces. It exposed how ambition, when driven by deceit, could corrode even the most glamorous lives. But more importantly, it showed how resilience, when nurtured with quiet determination, could rise from betrayal and burn brighter than any scandal. The farmhouse where it all nearly ended was later bought by a family who knew nothing of its past. Over time, its walls were repainted, the garden revived, the darkness forgotten. But for those who had lived through the ordeal, the memories remained, a reminder of what had almost been lost, and what had, against all odds, been reclaimed.